The bulldozer's engine roared to life as Marcus watched his dream pool crumble into concrete chunks. Karen Whitmore stood triumphant on her pristine lawn. Her HOA violation notice clutched like a weapon, but she had no idea what was buried beneath that crystal-clear water. As the excavator's claw tore through the pool's foundation, it revealed something that would turn her perfect neighborhood into a battlefield, and her smug smile into a mask of horror. What Marcus left behind wasn't just a mud pit, was her worst nightmare made real. Marcus Rivera had always believed in doing things right. When he'd bought the house on Maple Grove Lane 3 years ago, he'd read every single page of the HOA covenantal 47 mind-numbing pages of font, so small it could have been written by lawyers with microscopes. He'd followed every rule, paid every fee, and even volunteered for the annual block party committee twice. So when he decided to install a pool in his backyard, he did what any reasonable homeowner would do. He filed the proper paperwork, application. For residential pool installation, he'd written in his careful engineer's handwriting, attaching architectural drawings, contractor licenses, and a detailed timeline. He'd even included a soil permeability report, though the HOA guidelines didn't require one. The approval had come back in 2 weeks. Stamped and signed by the Architectural Review Committee, construction began on a Tuesday in March, and by June, Marcus had the most beautiful kidney-shaped pool on the block. Saltwater system, LED lighting, natural stone coping the works. His daughter Sophia, home from her freshman year at State, had spent the summer teaching neighborhood kids how to swim. Even the mailman had complimented it, which made Karen Whitmore's appearance on his doorstep that sweltering September morning all the more confusing. Mr. Rivera. She stood ramrod straight in a pressed pink blazer despite the 90-degree heat, her silver hair shellacked into what Marcus privately called her speak-tooth manager helmet. Behind her stood 2 other women Marcus recognized from the HOA board, Linda Chen and Dorothy Kravitz, both looking uncomfortable in the morning sun. "Morning, Karen, ladies." Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel, having been interrupted mid-coffee. "What can I do for you?" Karen's lips pursed into what might charitably be called a smile. "We need to discuss your pool situation." "My pool situation." Marcus glanced back through his house toward the sliding glass doors, where his pool sparkled invitingly in the morning light. "Is there a problem with the chlorine levels?" "I had it tested yesterday. The problem, Mr. Rivera, is that your pool violates HOA regulations." Karen produced a manila folder thick with documents, specifically Section 4.2.3 regarding water features, and Section 7.1.1 regarding backyard modifications exceeding 50 square feet without proper approval. Marcus blinked. "But I have approval. You signed off on it yourself, Karen, back in February." "That approval was issued in error." Karen's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering a fatal diagnosis. "Upon further review, we've determined that your pool installation violates multiple covenants. Further review." Heat crept up Marcus's neck, and it wasn't from the September sun. "It's been 6 months. My daughter's been having friends over all summer. The concrete's been cured for months." Linda Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus, we're sorry about the timing, but the rules are the rules. We received ... complaints." "Complaints from who?" Karen's smile sharpened. "Anonymous complaints are protected under HOA privacy guidelines, but I will say that some residents feel your pool creates an unfair advantage in property values, not to mention the noise issues." Marcus almost laughed. "Noise issues? Kids swimming? Loud music? Shouting? Splashing at all hours?" "All hours?" "Karen, the latest anyone's been in that pool is 8 p.m., and that was for Sophia's going-away party." Marcus's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm, which you were invited to, by the way. Dorothy Kravitz looked like she wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. "Maybe we could work out some kind of compromise." "There's no compromise to be made." Karen cut her off with surgical precision. "The pool is in violation. It needs to be removed." "Removed?" The word came out strangled. "Karen, that pool cost $40,000. It's been approved for 6 months. My property taxes went up because of it. Should have thought of that before you violated the covenants." Karen handed him the manila folder. "You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance. After that, the HOA will pursue legal action and daily fines of $500. Marcus stared at the folder in his hands, feeling like he'd been sucker punched. This is insane. I have all the paperwork. Paperwork issued in error is invalid. Karen turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Rivera. The Architectural Review Committee meets monthly. If you'd like to reapply for pool installation with the proper square footage restrictions and setback requirements, you're welcome to do so. Of course, that would require removing the current structure first. What are the proper requirements? Marcus called after her. Karen's smile was arctic. Above-ground pools only. Maximum 12 feet by 4 feet, no permanent installation. And they need to be removed and stored indoors during winter months. Marcus watched the three women walk away, Karen's heels clicking against the sidewalk like a countdown timer. An above-ground pool, 12 by 4 feet, for a man who'd been swimming laps in his pool every morning for 4 months, who'd hosted his daughter's friends all summer, who'd spent weekends teaching his elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter. How to float it was like being told he could keep his car, but only if he removed the engine and wheels. He opened the manila folder. The first document was a copy of his original application, with denied stamped across it in red ink. The second was a list of supposed violations, each more ridiculous than the last. Failure to maintain proper setbacks, noise ordinance violations, improper drainage, failure to submit environmental impact studies. But it was the third document that made his blood run cold. A cease and desist order, already signed by a judge, giving him exactly 30 days to remove all unpermitted structures and restore the property to its original condition. How had Karen managed to get a judge to sign off on this without notifying him? How long had she been planning this? Marcus walked back into his house and stood at the sliding glass doors, looking out at his pool. The water was so clear he could see the penny Sophia had thrown in for luck on the day they'd first filled it. The landscaping around it had finely grown in native plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, carefully chosen to complement the natural stone. His phone buzzed. A text from his contractor, Eddie Morales. Hey man, got a weird call. From some HOA lady asking about your pool permit. Everything okay? Marcus typed back, call me. His phone rang 30 seconds later. Marcus, what the hell is going on? This woman Karen something she's been calling around town asking about your permits. She even called the city inspector. She's trying to force me to tear down the pool. On what grounds? That permit was solid. I've been doing pools for 15 years, and I've never seen paperwork that clean. She says it was approved in error. Eddie's laugh was bitter. Error, my ass. I know Karen Whitmore. She tried to shut down my business 2 years ago, claiming I was running a commercial operation out of my house. Had to threaten to sue her before she backed off. So this is personal. With Karen, everything's personal. The question is, what are you gonna do about it? Marcus looked out at his pool again. At the diving board Sophia had begged him to install. At the hot tub where he and his wife Maria had shared quiet evenings before she'd passed. At the memorial garden they'd planted together in the corner, where her roses were finally blooming. I'm going to fight this, good man, but Marcus, watch your back. Karen Whitmore doesn't play fair, and she doesn't like to lose. Marcus hung up and walked outside to his pool deck. The September sun was climbing higher, and the water looked impossibly inviting. He kicked off his shoes and rolled up his pants, sitting on the edge with his feet in the water. $40,000, 6 months of his life, his daughter's summer, his wife's roses. But as he sat there, something else began to simmer beneath the anger. Something that had been building for 3 years of HOA meetings and architectural review committees, and neighbors like Karen who treated their suburban paradise like a personal fiefdom. Marcus Rivera had always believed in doing things right. But sometimes doing things right wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to do things smart. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. First to his lawyer, then to the city planning office, then to Eddie, who knew every contractor, inspector, and permit officer in town. Karen Whitmore thought she'd won. She thought she'd cornered him with her legal maneuvers and her perfectly pressed blazers and her anonymous complaints. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that Marcus would roll over and accept defeat, the way every other neighbor had when she'd come knocking with her manila folders and her cease and desist orders. She'd forgotten that Marcus Rivera was an engineer. And engineers, didn't just solve problems, they found the most elegant, efficient solution possible. As Marcus sat by his pool, feet in the water he'd been ordered to drain, he began to smile. By the time he was done, Marcus spent the next 3 days doing what he did best, research. While Karen Whitmore had expected him to crumble under the weight of legal threats, Marcus had instead turned his dining room into a war room. Property records, HOA, meeting minutes. Going back 5 years, city planning documents and contractor permits covered every surface like pieces of a massive jigsaw puzzle. His laptop screen glowed at 2 a.m. as he scrolled through public records. Sophia, home for a long weekend, found him there Friday morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and highlighter-stained documents. "Dad, you look terrible." She poured herself orange juice, stepping carefully around the paper fortress he'd built. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep when I figure out how Karen managed to get a retroactive cease and desist order." Marcus rubbed his eyes, then pointed to a stack of papers. "Look at this. Every pool permit issued in our development for the past 3 years. Guess how many got retroactively denied? Just yours? Just mine. But here's the interesting part." He pulled up a satellite view on his laptop. "See that monstrosity behind Karen's house? That's not just a pool, that's a full outdoor kitchen, fire pit, and spa complex. Built last year. Guess what the total square footage is?" Sophia leaned over his shoulder. "I'm guessing more than 50 square feet. Try 800, and look at this." Marcus clicked through to another document. Her building permit application, filed and approved in a single day. By comparison, mine took 2 weeks, even though it was half the size. So she's a hypocrite. "That's not exactly breaking news, Dad." Marcus pulled up another screen HOA meeting. Minutes from 18 months ago, read the highlighted section. Sophia squinted at the dense text. "Motion to amend architectural review process to require environmental impact studies for all water features exceeding—" "Holy shit, Dad! She changed the rules after you already started construction." "Language, Mia. But yes, the environmental impact requirement was added to the covenants in March, after I'd already broken ground. Then retroactively applied to my permit." Marcus stood up, his back protesting after hours hunched over paperwork. But that's not the best part. He walked to the sliding glass door and pointed toward Karen's house, visible across the manicured backyards. "See that drainage ditch running along her back fence? The one that carries runoff from her pool complex into the storm drains? Yeah. According to city environmental records, that drainage connects directly to Miller Creek, which feeds into the reservoir, the same watershed that supplies drinking water to 3 counties. Marcus's smile was sharp. "Guess who never filed an environmental impact study?" Sophia grinned, and for a moment, she looked exactly like her mother when Maria had caught someone in a particularly satisfying contradiction. "Dad, you're kind of scary when you want to be. I learned from the best. Your mother could have been a prosecutor if she hadn't become a teacher." The mention of Maria brought the familiar ache, but also something else, a sense of purpose. Maria had never backed down from bullies, whether they were schoolyard tyrants or PTA trippers. She would have loved watching Marcus methodically dismantle Karen's house of cards. His phone rang. Eddie Morales. "Marcus, you sitting down?" "Should I be?" "I've been asking around about your HOA situation. Turns out you're not Karen's first victim. Remember the Johnsons on Oak Street? They had to remove a deck last year after Karen claimed it violated setback requirements. I remember they spent $10,000 on that deck." "Yeah, well, I just measured it. The deck was completely compliant. But get this, Johnson told me Karen offered to buy their house for below market value right after she forced them to tear down the deck. When they refused, she started finding violations with their mailbox, their garden shed, even their fence height." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She's trying to force people out. That's what I'm thinking. And I got more. You know the Garcias on Pine? They got hit with a pool violation 2 years ago. Different excuse, same result. Had to fill it in with concrete. Where are they now? Sold 6 months later to a development company called Whitmore Holdings." The room went silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sophia looked up from the papers, her expression shifting from amused to concerned. "Eddie, you're sure about this?" "Marcus, I've been in construction for 15 years. I know a property grab when I see one. Karen's not just some control freak, she's systematically targeting houses with expensive improvements, forcing owners to remove them, then swooping in with lowball offers when people can't handle the financial hit. Marcus sank into his chair. How many houses? From what I can tell, at least 6 in the past 3 years. All sold below market value to companies with some variation of the Whitmore name. After Eddie hung up, Marcus sat in silence, staring at the papers scattered across his table. This wasn't about pool regulations or HOA compliance. This was about money. Karen had turned the Maple Grove HOA into her personal real estate empire, using her position to create artificial crises that drove down property values. Dad, Sophia's voice was small. Are we going to lose the house? Marcus looked at his daughter, then out at the pool where she'd spent last summer teaching kids to swim, where Maria's roses bloomed in the memorial garden where he'd found peace. In the months after losing his wife, no, we're not. But even as he said it, Marcus felt the weight of what he was up against. Karen had the HOA board, legal connections, and apparently a systematic operation that had been running for years. She had resources and experience and the advantage of knowing the system inside and out. What Marcus had was anger, architectural drawings, and a growing pile of evidence that Karen might not be as untouchable as she thought. His phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. This is your final warning. Remove the pool or face the consequences. Some fights aren't worth fighting. Sophia read over his shoulder. Dad, that's not from the HOA, is it? No, it's not. Marcus screenshot the message and added it to a folder on his laptop labeled Evidence. But it tells me something important. What, Karen's scared? She's never had to send anonymous threats before because nobody's ever fought back. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Across the yards, he could see lights on in Karen's house, her silhouette moving back and forth behind gauze curtains. She's used to people folding. So what do we do? Marcus thought about the 6 families who'd lost their homes, the thousands of dollars in improvements destroyed, the dreams crushed under the weight of Karen's manufactured violations. He thought about Maria, who'd spent her career protecting kids from bullies, who'd taught him that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to hit back harder than they expected. We document everything, every violation she's ignored on her own property, every suspicious sale, every inconsistency in the HOA records. Marcus pulled up his laptop and started typing. And then we call in some help. What kind of help? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression, the kind that Karen Whitmore really isn't going to like. He opened his email and started typing. Dear Channel 7 Investigative Team, I'd like to report a story about HOA corruption and predatory real estate practices in the Maple Grove development. As he typed, Marcus felt something shift inside him. For months after Maria's death, he'd felt adrift, going through the motions of normal life without any real purpose. The pool had been an attempt to reclaim joy, to create something beautiful in the space where grief had taken root. Now Karen Whitmore had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, a fight worthy of Maria's memory. He hit send on the email, then started another one to the state attorney general's office, then one to the city planning department, then one to the Environmental Protection Agency. If Karen wanted to play games with permits and regulations, Marcus would show her what a real investigation looked like. By dawn, he'd sent 17 emails and made a dozen phone calls. The dining room looked like a disaster zone. Felt more focused than he had in months. Sophia found him making breakfast, humming under his breath for the first time since Maria's funeral. Feeling better? She asked. I'm feeling dangerous, Marcus replied, flipping pancakes with the precision of a man who'd found his purpose. And Karen Whitmore has no idea what's about to hit her. The first crack in Karen's armor appeared on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a woman in a cheap suit carrying a clipboard and a camera. Deadline was now down to 18 days when he heard the commotion from Karen's house. Raised voices, the sound of a car door slamming, then Karen's voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. You cannot be on my property without permission. This is harassment. Marcus walked to his back fence, where the slats provided a perfect view of Karen's elaborate pool complex. A woman with a press badge was methodically photographing every angle of Karen's outdoor kitchen while, Ma'am, I'm on the public easement, the reporter said calmly. And these photos are for a story about HOA enforcement inconsistencies. Would you like to comment on why your 800-square-foot pool complex was approved in one day while other residents wait weeks for much smaller projects? I don't know what you're talking about. All improvements in this development are subject to the same approval process, including environmental impact studies. The reporter consulted her clipboard because, according to city records, your drainage system empties directly into protected watershed, but there's no environmental study on file. That's when Karen spotted Marcus watching from his fence. Her expression shifted from flustered to murderous. This is all his doing. She pointed at Marcus like she was identifying a war criminal. He's the one spreading lies and harassment because he can't accept that his illegal pool needs to be removed. The reporter turned toward Marcus with interest. Mr. Rivera, I'm Jessica Walsh from Channel 7 Investigates. Could I speak with you about your HOA situation? Providing documentation while she recorded everything on her phone. Sophia had strategically positioned herself where she could see Karen's house through the window. She's pacing now, Sophia reported, and I think she just threw something at her sliding glass door. Jessica looked up from Marcus's permit documents. Mr. Rivera, this is remarkable. You have approval signatures from Karen Whitmore herself, dated February 15th. But the cease and desist order claims your permit was invalid from the beginning. That's what she told me. Said it was approved in error. Errors like this don't happen accidentally. Jessica pulled up something on her tablet. This patterns and rule changes, retroactive, violations, properties sold below market value to connected buyers. It's textbook predatory practice. Marcus leaned forward. Maple Grove is the fourth in this county alone. But Karen Whitmore is by far the most sophisticated operator I've encountered. Jessica showed him her tablet screen, which displayed a complex flowchart. Look at this. Whitmore Holdings, Whitmore Property Management, Grove Development LLC, Maple Tree Investments, all connected to Karen or her family members. She's created an entire ecosystem designed to manipulate property values. Dad, Sophia, called from the window. Karen's got company. 3 cars just pulled up, and they do not look happy. Jessica and Marcus joined Sophia at the window. Karen was now flanked by what appeared to be the entire HOA board, plus a man in an expensive suit who was gesticulating wildly at Karen's pool area. She called him the minute she saw me taking pictures. Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed the HOA office number. Don't answer it, Jessica advised. Whatever they're planning, let them make the first move on record. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. This time it was Linda Chen calling from her personal number. Marcus, you need to know Corinne's calling an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. She's claiming you've been harassing board members and violating noise ordinances. She wants to authorize immediate legal action. Linda, you know that's not true. I know, but Marcus, she's lost it. Your house for code violations. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Dorothy and I are scared of her. She's been making threats. What kind of threats? She knows things about people, private things, financial problems, family issues, affairs. I don't know how she gets the information, but she uses it. Linda's voice cracked slightly. She'd make sure my husband's contracting business never got another permit in this county. Marcus looked at Jessica, who was listening intently and taking notes. Linda, would you be willing to go on record about this? A long pause. I can't. I'm sorry, Marcus. After Linda hung up, Jessica shook her head grimly. Classic intimidation tactics. She's got the whole board under her thumb through blackmail and threats. So how do we stop her? We don't just stop her, Jessica said, her eyes bright with investigative fervor. We destroy her entire operation, but we need to move fast. As if summoned by her words, Marcus's doorbell rang. Through the front window, they could see Karen standing on his porch, flanked by her lawyer and 2 men Marcus didn't recognize. Should I answer it? Marcus asked. Jessica grinned. Oh, absolutely. But first, let me set up my camera. This is about to get very interesting. Marcus opened the door to find Karen in full battle regalia power suit, perfect makeup, and an expression that could freeze hell. Her lawyer, a thin man with dead eyes, held a thick folder of documents. Mr. Rivera, I'm Jonathan Pike, representing the Maple Grove HOA. We're here to serve you with formal notice of emergency proceedings. The harassment of board members, the refusal to comply with valid HOA orders, the conspiracy theories you've been spreading, it's all very concerning behavior. What conspiracy theories? Claims that the HOA is engaged in some kind of real estate manipulation scheme. Accusations that I've been targeting homeowners for personal gain. Karen's laugh was brittle and sharp. It's clearly the product of grief-induced paranoia, and the board feels we need to take protective action. Pike handed Marcus a document. This is a restraining order preventing you from contacting any HOA board members or attending HOA meetings pending a psychological evaluation. Marcus stared at the paper. A psychological evaluation. Court-ordered, Pike continued smoothly, based on reports of erratic behavior, threats against board members, and concerning social media activity. What social media activity? I don't even have a Facebook account. Karen smiled triumphantly. The posts speak for themselves. Threatening language, conspiracy theories, even veiled threats against specific community members. Very disturbing content. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Someone had created fake social media accounts in his name. Karen wasn't just playing dirty, she was rewriting reality itself. But then he heard the soft whir of Jessica's camera from behind him, and he remembered he wasn't alone in this fight. That's very interesting, Marcus said loudly enough for the camera to pick up, because I've never made any social media posts about the HOA or anyone in this community. In fact, I think I'd like to see these posts you're referring to. Pike's expression flickered slightly. That's evidence in ongoing proceedings that I apparently wasn't notified about until now, Marcus continued, which seems strange, since due process usually requires actual notice before ex parte restraining orders. Behind him, Jessica was practically purring with satisfaction. Karen's lawyer had just admitted to obtaining a restraining order without proper notice, which would make it invalid in most jurisdictions. Karen, however, seemed oblivious to the legal trap she'd just walked into. The point is, Marcus, this has gone far enough. Remove the pool, comply with HOA regulations, and we can all move on with our lives. Or what? Karen's smile turned predatory. Or we'll make sure you don't have a choice. This community has standards, and people who can't meet those standards, well, they usually find somewhere else that's more suitable for their lifestyle. The threat was clear, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd used similar tactics successfully before. But Karen had made one crucial error. On fabricated evidence, Marcus looked past Karen to her lawyer, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Pike, I think you might want to advise your client about the legal implications of what she just said, especially since everything has been recorded. For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. Recorded, Jessica stepped into view, camera in hand, press badge clearly visible. Hi Karen, Jessica Walsh, Channel 7, investigates. Thanks for the interview. This is going to make an excellent story about HOA corruption and intimidation tactics. The color drained from Karen's face so quickly. Karen Whitmore had never been one to make idle threats. Marcus discovered this at 3:47 a.m. when his smoke detectors started shrieking. He bolted upright in bed, immediately alert to many years as a volunteer firefighter had trained that response into his nervous system. But instead of smoke, he smelled something else, chlorine. Lots of it. He grabbed his robe and raced outside, where the acrid stench hit him like a physical blow. His pool, which had been crystal clear when he'd checked it before bed, now glowed, an eerie green under the LED lights. The water level had dropped by nearly 3 feet, and dead fish floated on the surface koi from Mrs. Patterson's pond next door. Their bright orange bodies stark against the chemical soup his pool had become. Sophia appeared beside him, covering her nose with her pajama sleeve. Dad, what happened? Someone dumped industrial chemicals in the pool. Marcus pulled out his phone and started taking pictures, probably muriatic acid and copper sulfate. From the color, this isn't just vandalism, this is environmental sabotage. The smell was getting worse, and Marcus could see his neighbor's lights coming on as the chemical cloud spread through the subdivision. Mrs. Patterson stumbled out of her house, took one look at her dead koi fish, and started crying. I'm calling the police, Sophia said, but Marcus grabbed her arm. Wait, let me call someone else first. He dialed Jessica Walsh's number. She answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake despite the hour. Marcus, what's wrong? Karen just escalated. Someone poisoned my pool with industrial chemicals. It's created a toxic cloud that's affecting the whole neighborhood. Jesus, are you getting pictures already on it? But Jessica, this isn't just about property damage anymore. Mrs. Patterson's fish are dead. And if this gets into the storm drains, it'll contaminate the watershed. The same watershed that feeds into the city's water supply. Jessica's voice sharpened. Marcus, this is felony environmental terrorism. Don't let anyone near that pool, and don't let any water drain anywhere until hazmat gets there. I'm calling this in to the EPA emergency line right now. And Marcus, don't clean anything up. This is now a federal crime scene. Within an hour, Marcus's quiet suburban street looked like something from a disaster movie. EPA hazmat teams in full suits were taking water samples, while fire department crews evacuated a 6-house radius. Police had cordoned off the entire block, and news vans were arriving despite the early hour. Karen, Marcus noticed, was conspicuously absent from the crowd of concerned neighbors. Her house remained dark while everyone else on the street stood, in bathrobes and pajamas, watching environmental protection specialists pump toxic sludge from what used to be his pool. Mr. Rivera, a woman in an EPA windbreaker, approached him. I'm Agent Sandra Martinez. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here. Someone dumped chemicals in my pool sometime after midnight. I can give you a list of people who might have had motive. Agent Martinez raised an eyebrow. This wasn't random. Definitely not random. Marcus handed her his phone, which contained screenshots of Karen's threats, copies of the fake restraining order, and Jessica's investigative files. I'm in the middle of an HOA dispute with someone who's been systematically targeting homeowners in this development. Martinez scrolled through the information, her expression growing darker with each screen. Mr. Rivera, what you're describing sounds like organized criminal activity. Has this person made direct threats? Yesterday afternoon, on camera, show me. 20 minutes later, Agent Martinez was on her radio calling for additional federal agents. The chemical attack had elevated Marcus's HOA dispute into a federal investigation involving environmental terrorism, mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. As the sun came up, Marcus watched EPA crews drain the toxic remnants of his pool, while FBI agents took statements from neighbors. The beautiful kidney-shaped oasis he'd built as a memorial to Maria was gone, replaced by a concrete crater that looked like a bomb had gone off. But as devastating as it was, Marcus felt something unexpected: relief. Karen had finally overplayed her hand in a way that couldn't be covered up or explained away. Dad, Sophia, appeared at his elbow, holding 2 cups of coffee from the emergency services truck. There's something you need to see. She handed him her laptop, which was open to the Maple Grove HOA Facebook page. Karen had posted a statement an hour ago. Residents of Maple Grove, it is with deep concern that I address the environmental disaster that occurred early this morning. As your HOA president, I want to assure everyone that this tragic incident only reinforces why our architectural review process exists. Properties with unpermitted water features pose serious safety risks to our entire community, as we've now seen firsthand. The HOA board will be meeting in emergency session to discuss new safety protocols and the immediate removal of all non-compliant water features to prevent future disasters. Our thoughts are with the Rivera family during this difficult time. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. She's blaming me for this. She poisoned my pool and then blamed me for the environmental damage. It gets worse, Sophia said grimly. Look at the comments. The post had dozens of responses, and they weren't sympathetic. Neighbors who'd been friendly for 3 years were now calling Marcus irresponsible and selfish. Someone had shared photos of Mrs. Patterson's dead fish with the caption, "This is what happens when people ignore HOA rules." Another comment demanded that Marcus pay for environmental cleanup and property damage to surrounding homes. They don't know, Marcus realized. They think this was an accident caused by my pool chemicals, and Karen's making sure they keep thinking that. Sophia pointed to another post. She shared a news article about swimming pool chemical accidents, with commentary about how unpermitted pools are more dangerous because they don't get proper inspections. Marcus felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. Karen hadn't just attacked his property, she'd turned his own neighbors. against him while positioning herself as the community protector. It was masterful manipulation, and it would have worked perfectly if she hadn't left so much evidence behind. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Turn on channel 7. Now, Marcus grabbed the remote and switched on the TV just as Jessica's face appeared on screen, standing in front of his house with the EPA hazmat operation visible in the background. "Good morning. I'm Jessica Walsh with Channel 7 Investigates. What you're seeing behind me is the aftermath of what federal agents are calling a deliberate chemical attack on a suburban swimming pool, an attack that may be connected to a larger pattern of HOA corruption and intimidation." The report was devastating. Jessica had clearly been working all night because she'd assembled a comprehensive expose that connected the chemical attack to Karen's systematic targeting of homeowners, complete with interviews from the Garcia family and other victims who'd been driven from their homes. But the coup de grace came when Jessica played the recording of Karen's threats from the day before, followed by security camera footage from Mrs. Patterson's house that showed a figure in dark clothing dumping something into Marcus's pool at 2:30 a.m. While the footage isn't clear enough to identify the perpetrator, Jessica reported, the timing is significant. This attack occurred less than 12 hours after HOA President Karen Whitmore was recorded making threats against the homeowner, saying, quote, "I will destroy you. I will destroy your house, your reputation, your entire life." Marcus's phone started ringing, immediately reporters, neighbors, even his sister calling from Phoenix after seeing the story go national. But the call that mattered came from Agent Martinez. "Mr. Rivera, we've got enough evidence to make arrests. The security footage shows someone with access to commercial-grade chemicals, and the pattern of behavior you've documented establishes clear motive. We're executing search warrants this morning." Marcus looked out his window and saw FBI agents walking up Karen's driveway with a warrant and a K-9 unit. Karen's front door opened, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Marcus saw her looking genuinely frightened. She was still in her bathrobe, her perfect hair disheveled, and her face pale without makeup. The imperious HOA president, who'd threatened to destroy his life, now looked like exactly what she was, a middle-aged woman who'd finally been caught. As they led her away in handcuffs, Karen looked directly at Marcus, across the yards that separated their houses. Even from 50 feet away, he could see the fury in her eyes, the promise that this wasn't over. But something had changed in Marcus, too. The man who'd always believed in doing things right, who'd followed every rule and filed every form, had been forged into something harder by Karen's campaign of destruction. She'd wanted to destroy his life. She'd succeeded in destroying his pool, his relationship with his neighbors, and his faith in playing by the rules. But she'd also given him something she never intended: absolute clarity about what happened when good people tried to reason with bullies. As the FBI cars pulled away, Marcus looked down at the toxic crater where his beautiful pool used to be. Then he pulled out his phone and called Eddie Morales. "Eddie, it's Marcus. I need you to bring your biggest excavator. We're going to dig up that pool." The FBI said not to disturb the crime scene. Karen Whitmore made bail in 18 hours, a fact that surprised no one who knew how deeply her tentacles reached into the local legal system. What did surprise everyone was what she found waiting for her when she returned to Maple Grove Lane. Marcus had been busy. The excavation began at dawn on Friday, exactly 72 hours after the chemical attack. Eddie Morales arrived with not just his biggest excavator, but 3 additional machines and a crew of 8 men, who'd all worked for families that Karen had driven from their homes over the years. "You sure about this, Marcus?" Eddie asked as they stood at the edge of what used to be Marcus's pool. "Once we start digging, there's no going back." Marcus looked across the street where Karen's house sat empty, federal seizure notices taped to the windows. The FBI had found enough evidence in their search to expand the investigation into a multi-state real estate fraud operation. Bail conditions prohibited her from entering Maple Grove, but Marcus knew she was watching somehow. She always was, I'm sure. Start with the deep end. The excavator's steel teeth bit into the concrete with a satisfying crunch that echoed across the subdivision. Mrs. Patterson, whose koi fish had been the first casualties of Karen's war, brought Marcus coffee and stood watching with grim satisfaction as the pool that had cost him $40,000 was systematically demolished. "That woman destroyed so many lives," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. The Garcias had to sell their house to pay the fines she imposed. The Johnsons' marriage didn't survive the stress of her harassment. She's a cancer that's been eating this neighborhood alive. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the excavation. The pool was only the beginning. By noon, they'd removed all the concrete and were digging deeper, much deeper. The hole that had once been kidney-shaped was now a perfect rectangle, 20 feet wide, 30 feet long, and getting deeper by the hour. Sophia arrived with lunch for the crew, took one look at the massive excavation, and pulled her father aside. "Dad, what exactly are you building here?" "Nothing," Marcus replied. "I'm following Karen's orders exactly. She wanted the pool removed and the property restored to its original condition. That's exactly what I'm doing. This hole is 3 times bigger than the pool ever was." The soil contamination from her chemical attack spread beyond the pool. "Boundaries, we have to excavate all the contaminated earth." Marcus pointed to a stack of EPA reports on his deck table. Federal environmental guidelines require removal of soil to a depth of 12 feet in cases of industrial chemical contamination. It's all documented. Sophia stared at him. 12 feet, Dad? You're creating a crater." "I'm creating compliance," Marcus corrected. "Karen wanted me to follow the rules. I'm following every environmental regulation, building code, and federal guideline that applies to chemical contamination, cleanup." By evening, the hole was 12 feet deep and looked like an archaeological dig site. Marcus had Eddie's crew install proper safety barriers, warning signs, and temporary lighting. Everything was documented, photographed, and filed with the appropriate agencies. On Saturday, the second phase began. "Marcus," Eddie called from the edge of the excavation, "you sure about this drainage system? This is way more complex than anything you'd need for a standard pool." Marcus consulted the engineering drawings he'd been working on for 3 days. Environmental regulations require proper drainage for any area that's been contaminated with industrial chemicals. The French drain system will prevent groundwater contamination and ensure proper runoff management. What Marcus didn't mention was that the drainage system he'd designed would redirect every drop of rainwater from a 2-ker area directly into the excavated hole, creating a permanent water feature that would be impossible to fill or develop. The work continued through the weekend. Trenches for drainage pipes snaked across not just Marcus's yard, but into the easements that bordered Karen's property. Everything was legal. Marcus had obtained every permit, filed every environmental impact study, and followed every regulation. To the letter, on Monday morning, Karen's lawyer called. "Mr. Rivera, my client is concerned about the extensive excavation work you're conducting. The HOA Architectural Review Committee hasn't approved any of these modifications." Marcus almost laughed. "Mr. Pike, your client is currently under federal indictment and prohibited from entering the subdivision. The HOA board has been dissolved pending investigation. And the Architectural Review Committee consists of one person, Linda Chun, who signed off on my environmental remediation plan yesterday." There was a long pause. "Environmental remediation? Federal cleanup of industrial chemical contamination. I'm sure Karen explained to you about the EPA emergency response to her chemical attack on my property." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Rivera, perhaps we could discuss some kind of compromise, Mr. Pike. I'm simply following the law. Something your client should have considered before committing environmental terrorism." Marcus hung up and walked outside, where Eddie's crew was installing the final section of drainage pipe. The excavation was now complete, a perfect rectangular hole 12 feet deep with concrete-lined walls and a sophisticated drainage system that would keep it permanently filled with water. It was, by every legal definition, no longer a pool. The city had classified it as an environmental remediation water retention system, which put it in an entirely different category of municipal regulations. It required no building permits, no HOA approval, and no architectural review. It was also, Marcus had to admit, absolutely hideous. The concrete walls were industrial gray. The bottom was lined with utilitarian drainage grates, and the whole thing looked like a municipal storm retention pond, which technically it was. Sophia found him Wednesday evening, sitting on his deck and looking down into the concrete-lined crater. "Dad, I have to ask when. This fills up with rainwater. What's it going to look like?" Marcus pulled up his laptop and showed her the engineering projections. Based on average rainfall patterns, it should reach full capacity within 6 weeks. The water will be approximately 10 feet deep, covering 600 square feet of surface area. It's going to look like a concrete bunker filled with muddy water. It's going to look like exactly what Karen asked for, Marcus corrected. She wanted my beautiful pool removed and the property restored to its original condition. Well, the original condition of this land was a seasonal wetland that collected runoff from the surrounding area. Sophia stared at the projection, then started laughing. "Dad, you're diabolical. This thing is going to be a permanent eyesore that she'll have to look at every day from her house." "If she ever gets to come back to her house," Marcus replied. "The federal charges carry a minimum sentence of 5 years. But even as he said it, Marcus knew Karen would find a way back. Women like her always did. Money, lawyers, plea bargains. Appeals she'd work every angle until she was back in her house looking out at his property. When she did, she'd see exactly what she'd created. Thursday morning brought the first rain since the excavation was completed. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching water cascade into the concrete retention system from drainage pipes that collected runoff from half the neighborhood. Within hours, the bottom was covered with several inches of murky water. His phone rang. Jessica Walsh. "Marcus, I'm looking at aerial footage of your property. What exactly did you build?" "Environmental compliance," Marcus replied. "Federal regulations required removal of contaminated soil and installation of proper drainage systems. Everything's been approved by EPA, the city engineering department, and what's left of the HOA board. It looks like a fortified mud pit. It's a water retention system designed to prevent environmental contamination from reaching the municipal water supply." Marcus smiled. "Completely legal, fully compliant, and absolutely permanent." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, you realize this is going to affect your property value." "My property value was already destroyed when Karen turned my neighbors against me and poisoned my pool. At least now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." That afternoon, the first for sale sign appeared on Maple Grove Lane. Then another. By Friday, 6 houses were on the market, including 2 that bordered Marcus's new water retention system. Marcus wasn't surprised. Who wanted to live next to what looked like a concrete storm drain? Property values on the street would plummet, just as they had everywhere else Karen had operated. But there was one crucial difference this time. Karen couldn't swoop in and buy the properties at below-market prices, because Karen was facing federal charges that would keep her tied up in court for years. Her real estate empire was frozen, pending investigation. Her assets were under seizure, and her ability to manipulate local property markets had been permanently destroyed. Marcus had turned Karen's own tactics against her, creating the exact kind of property value disaster she'd inflicted on so many other families. The only difference was that this time, she couldn't profit from it. Friday evening, as Marcus sat on his deck watching the water level in his retention system rise with the afternoon rain, Sophia joined him with 2 beers. "Dad, I have to ask, are you happy with how this turned out?" Marcus looked down at the concrete-lined crater that had once been his beautiful memorial pool. The water was muddy brown. 2 years later, Marcus was tending Maria's roses when he heard the moving truck. He looked up from the memorial garden, now thriving in the shadow of the concrete water retention system, to see a U-Haul backing into Karen Whitmore's driveway. After 18 months in federal prison, plea bargains that had cost her everything, and a bankruptcy that had stripped away her real estate empire, Karen was finally coming home. Sophia, now a junior at state, but home for spring break, joined him at the garden fence. "I can't believe she's actually moving back. Where else would she go?" Marcus wiped soil from his hands, watching as Karen emerged from a beat-up sedan that had seen better days. Gone was the pristine silver Lexus, the perfect hair, the power suits. The woman struggling with a box of belongings looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 years. Karen glanced toward his property and stopped dead when she saw the water retention system. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see her face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been broken. Laughter. The concrete-lined pit was exactly as ugly as he'd designed it to be, filled with 10 feet of murky rainwater that reflected the sky like a giant utilitarian mirror. Cattails had taken root along the edges. Marcus had planted them himself, to comply with federal wetland restoration. guidelines, and the whole thing looked like a municipal storm drain disguised as a nature preserve. "It really is hideous," Sophia observed with satisfaction. "It's perfect," Marcus corrected. Over the past 2 years, the water retention system had served its purpose beautifully. Property values on Maple Grove Lane had crashed exactly as Marcus had predicted, dropping by nearly 40%. 8 families had sold and moved away, unable to tolerate living next to what looked like a concrete bunker filled with swamp water. But here was the beautiful irony. Because the system was classified as environmental infrastructure rather than a residential improvement, it had actually increased Marcus's property value in the eyes of the tax assessor. The city credited him with providing valuable stormwater management for the entire subdivision, reducing his property taxes while simultaneously making his house the least desirable address on the street. Karen spent her first week back home. In obvious agony, Marcus could see her standing at her kitchen window several times a day, staring out at the concrete retention system like it was a personal affront to her existence, which of course it was. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Marcus was doing his daily water quality testing, another requirement of his environmental compliance permits. Karen appeared at his property line, looking haggard, in a faded jogging suit that would have been unthinkable during her HOA presidency. "Hello, Marcus." He looked up from his pH testing kit. "Karen, how's federal probation treating you?" Her smile was brittle as old plastic. "I see you've redecorated. Environmental compliance. You know how important it is to follow regulations." Marcus made a note on his water quality log, a gesture deliberately calculated to remind her that his ugly concrete pit was completely legal and utterly permanent. Karen stared at the murky water, where a family of ducks had taken up residence. Despite the industrial appearance, "You know, Marcus, I've had 2 years to think about our ... disagreement. Prison gives you a lot of time for reflection. And what did you conclude? That we both lost something beautiful in this fight?" Karen's voice carried an odd note of sincerity. "You had a gorgeous pool that brought joy to your family and the neighborhood. I had a reputation and a business that I'd built over decades. Now look at you, you're living next to a concrete eyesore. And I'm a convicted felon living in a house I can barely afford to keep." Marcus studied her face, looking for the manipulation he knew had to be there. "Are you suggesting this is somehow my fault?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time we both moved on, forgave and forgot." Karen's smile became more animated. For a moment, Marcus could see the charismatic woman who'd once commanded HOA meetings with imperial authority. You could fill in that ... system and put in a proper pool again. "I could help navigate the approval process, make sure everything goes smoothly this time." "Help navigate the approval process?" Marcus almost laughed. "Karen, you're a convicted felon. You're banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. You have no authority to approve anything. But I have experience, connections, knowledge of how these systems really work." Karen's desperation was becoming more apparent. "Marcus, that water retention system is destroying both our property values. If you restored your backyard to something beautiful, it would benefit everyone on the street." Marcus looked down at the concrete-lined pit that had become the defining feature of his property. Karen was right, it was hideous. It had ruined his view, destroyed his property value, and created a daily reminder of the ugliest conflict of his life. But it had also done something else. "Karen, do you know what happened to the Garcia family after you forced them out of their house?" The question seemed to surprise her. What does that have to do with anything?" "They moved to Phoenix. Mr. Garcia had to take a job paying $30,000 less than what he was making here. Their daughter had to change schools in her senior year. Mrs. Garcia's mother died while they were trying to rebuild their lives in a new city, and she couldn't afford to fly back for the funeral because you'd cost them their life savings." Karen's expression flickered. "Marcus, that's unfortunate, but business is business. Business." Marcus's voice rose. "You poisoned my pool, terrorized my neighbors, and committed federal crimes to steal people's homes. That's not business." "Sociopathia made mistakes," Karen said quickly. "I admit that. But continuing this vendetta isn't helping anyone. That concrete pit is making everyone miserable, including you." Marcus looked at the water retention system, then back at Karen. For 2 years, he'd taken grim satisfaction in knowing that she'd have to look at the consequences of her actions every day. But standing there, looking at the broken woman who'd once seemed so powerful, he felt something unexpected: pity. Karen Whitmore had lost everything: her business, her reputation, her freedom, her financial security. She was living in a house she could barely afford, staring every day at a constant reminder of how completely she'd been defeated. But then Marcus remembered Mrs. Patterson's dead koi fish, the Garcia family's destroyed dreams, the other families who'd been driven from their homes by Karen's systematic campaign of harassment and manipulation, and his own beautiful pool turned into a toxic waste site by a woman who couldn't bear to see anyone else happy. "You're right about one thing, Karen," Marcus said finally. "That retention system is ugly. It's destroyed the beauty of this property and cost me everything I built here." Karen's face brightened with hope. "But you know what's really beautiful?" Marcus continued. "Justice, and that ugly concrete pit represents something more beautiful than any pool ever could. The knowledge that bullies eventually face consequences for their actions." The hope died in Karen's eyes. "Every morning for the rest of your life," Marcus said quietly, "you're going to wake up and see that water retention system. And you're going to remember that this is what happens when you try to destroy people who refuse to be destroyed." He turned and walked back toward his house, leaving Karen standing at the property line. Behind him, he heard her voice, sharp with the old imperial anger. "This isn't over, Marcus. You can't keep that thing there forever." Marcus paused at his sliding glass door and looked back. Karen stood silhouetted against the morning sun, hands clenched into fists, glaring at the concrete pit that had replaced his pool. "Actually, Karen, I can. Environmental infrastructure is protected under federal law. That retention system isn't going anywhere." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it was genuinely happy. "But you're welcome to file a complaint with the EPA. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you again." As he watched Karen walk back to her house, shoulders slumped, defeated, Marcus felt something settle inside him. For 2 years, he'd wondered if his revenge had been worth the cost, if destroying something beautiful to achieve justice had been the right choice. Now he knew. Marcus Rivera had always believed in doing things right, and sometimes doing things right meant making sure that people who hurt others faced consequences that lasted as long as the damage they'd caused. He looked out at his concrete water retention system, where the morning sun was turning the murky water into a mirror that reflected infinite sky. It would never be as beautiful as the pool he'd lost, but it would serve as a permanent reminder that in a world full of bullies and manipulators, sometimes the good guys really do win, even if winning looks nothing like what you thought you wanted. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and sat on his deck, watching the ducks paddle across the surface of his environmental compliance. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Karen's front door slam with the sound of absolute defeat. Justice, Marcus had learned, wasn't always beautiful, but it was always worth it.